Hey everyone, welcome to this 2022 adult sci-fi debut panel, which you may have seen on the internet in a various permutation of that title, like debut 2022 or 2022 debut. I couldn't really figure out like how exactly I wanted to make that as clear as possible. But I'm so excited to be joined by all of these sci-fi books. Sci-fi is like truly where my heart of heart lies, and so I'm so happy that we were able to get this adult debut panel together. Just a quick, like, 1 second sentence about me. My name's Lily, and I'm kind of the face behind Utopia State of Mind on the internet. Um, that's all you really need to know. So I'm going to have the authors introduce themselves. Then we'll go into Q&A from my side. And if you have questions during the panel, please leave them in the chat. I will try to remind people as well, and also I'll try to sort of remember to scroll back when you have the questions. So definitely leave your questions throughout the chat in the, I don't know actually orientation wise where it is, but I'm sure everyone will find it. Anyway, so let's have the panelists introduce themselves and we'll get into all of my questions. Con, do you want to start first?
Sure. I'm Con Wong, and I am the author of The Circus Infinite, which came out from Angry Robot Books in March of this year. And the elevator pitch is a circus takes down a crime boss on the galaxy's infamous Pleasure Moon. It's a space fantasy, and it features an asexual protagonist and lots of queer rep and aliens with weird powers. Standard, space fantasy fare, and also some not standard, I hope.
Ren?
Hi, I'm Ren Hutchings. I am the author of Under Fortunate Stars. This is my debut novel, came out from Solaris this year. It is a space opera told in multiple points of view, and it's about accidental time travel and a history nerd to the rescue and the perils of actually meeting your historical heroes.
Christy?
Sure. Hi, I'm Christy Gardner, and I'm a sci-fi fantasy horror author from Vancouver, BC. And my debut book, The Stars in Their Eyes, is a queer dark sci-fi, and it came out through City Owl Press in October of this year. And the little elevator pitch that I have for it is Kalei and Tessa's love has kept them alive 4 years after the aliens decimated Earth. But after Tess disappears, Kalei is thrust into the darkness, haunted by horrors beyond her imagination. And to survive and reunite with the woman she loves, she has to choose between the unthinkable. Give up or give them hell.
Cool tagline.
Hi, I'm CL Pirlo. I'm a disaster queer who writes disaster queer books. That is my new tagline for myself. And my book, Bluebird, it came out with Angry Robot this year in February. The elevator pitch is lesbian gunslinger fights spies in space. So if you like romps, found family trope, and anti-colonial narratives, might be the book for you.
And Taryn?
Hi, I'm Taryn Hunt. My book, The Immortality Thief, just came out from Solaris in October. And The Immortality Thief is about a very talented amateur linguist and very mediocre smuggler who is blackmailed into looking for the secret of immortal life on a supposedly abandoned spaceship. And everything goes horribly wrong for him.
Perfect. Okay. When I was thinking about the questions, I obviously first wanted to start off with kind of space, right? I can't remember. This is going to make me like such a bad sci-fi fan, but like, you know the intro that starts with space.
Final Frontier, yes.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, now everything is like vacating my brain at once as I say it, but I can hear it in my mind. I want to talk about space, the life in the beyond. So I want to know, what was the inspiration behind your stories, sort of why sci-fi and space, and kind of tangentially related kind of sci-fi influences. Do you want to start, Ren?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think my intro to speculative fiction and sci-fi kind of happened at the same time. When I saw the movie Flight of the Navigator when I was about 6. And I found that equal parts terrifying and fascinating. And I think I've just been like in love with time travel stories ever since. So I always knew that was like a corner of sci-fi that I wanted to write around. After that, as a teen, I read The Starlight Crystal by Christopher Pike, which is like a story about a teen girl that ends up having some time twisty adventures in space. And I think the combination of those two things like put me on a trajectory into the sci-fi bookshelves, like in the library. And my mom is also a big sci-fi fan, so we had a lot of books around the house. And I think my big influence in terms of modern space opera is probably Alistair Reynolds, in terms of world building and also putting together plots that span a lot of time and space and kind of layer into each other really intricately. So I think he was a huge influence for me in the specific area of space opera.
Chrissy?
Yeah, so I've it's funny that Ren mentioned Flight of the Navigator, because I remember sitting in my living room watching that as a child over and over and over again. So that was definitely an influence for me. Most of the sci-fi I have written so far actually takes place mostly on Earth. And I think that's because a lot of the influences that I've had in that genre have actually been sort of reimaginings of our future as humanity's future, set in this sort of universe, this world. And I've always been enamored with the unknown, and mainly the unknown about humanity. So like, who are we? What does being human really mean at its core? How do we shape our understanding of what that looks like? And so I really like character-driven emotional sci-fi, things like more recently, anything by Martha Wells, Becky Chambers, Margaret Atwood. Robert Kirkman from The Walking Dead has been massively influential, especially for this book. I think it's just brilliant storytelling. Cormac McCarthy. So they're not all necessarily stories that are set in space, but they do provide an alternate vision for the world or our future, and sort of life in the beyond, and what that looks like for us as individuals and as a species. Plus, sci-fi is just cool.
CL?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be really basic and admit that I got into sci-fi through Star Wars and Star Trek, classic, really niche media. I don't know if anyone's heard of them, but no, I've liked sci-fi and fantasy kind of with equal parts, and I think there's like a freedom sort of to it that I really vibe with, that I really enjoy. And although for Bluebird in particular, I was inspired by Firefly, obviously the TV show, love that show. And also a lot of video games. I play a lot of video games, and there's a lot of just really cool aspects of sci-fi that, God, I'm a sucker for rule of cool. If something looks cool, I'm gonna love it. And I feel like sci-fi, there's so much like initial rule of cool that I see in a lot of video games, and then it's really interesting for me to be like, okay, let's dig deeper into why that's cool. Like, why is that the way it is? You know, what world building goes behind that fun video game mechanic of smashing buttons until something goes shiny? Like, I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff.
Is one of those video games Mass Effect?
I have never played a Mass Effect in my life. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who BioWare is.
Okay, yeah, no idea. Totally new.
I love that. I've never heard it be described as the rule of cool, but I really love that now. I think
It's
now
a
everything
classic.
clicks. Taryn?
Space is cool. Rule of cool again. I always really liked it. I studied astrophysics in school, and then stopped. But I like space. I think it's very cool. I also like how sci-fi is more of a setting than a genre sometimes. And you can use it, you can make the characters' internal struggles external creatively, which I like. I like to see the internal reflected externally in a preferably very cool setting. I also watched a lot of Star Trek, and Animorphs is the one. And Mass Effect is a game I've never played in my life.
No one's ever played it.
I've never heard of anyone who's played it.
Yeah, no.
It's indie, yeah.
Is it even real? I don't know. I think it's a rumor.
Sometimes legends get mixed up with facts.
I'm Khan.
Well, I legit have never played Mass Effect, so.
Neither.
So as a kid, I was fascinated with astronomy, and it was my childhood ambition to be an astronaut. And then as I advanced through schooling and stuff, I quickly realized I'm either not smart enough for this or I'm just too lazy for it. But so like writing sci-fi was like that's the thing, I guess. Obviously, Star Trek and Star Wars are influences for this book. But honestly, as a kid, I think that I read more fantasy than sci-fi. But the first sci-fi book that I read, which still remains, the first like adult sci-fi book that I read that remains to this day one of my favorite is The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I guess technically is a novella. But anyway, that was the book that kind of blew my head open in terms of like the kind of issues that can be examined through this genre, and it's not all pew pew and escapism and stuff, which I love. For the Circus Infinite, I did lean really heavully into pulpy pew pew escapism, I have to admit, but hopefully other more serious things are there as well. And I had something else to say, but now it's gone from my mind. So, so I'll just leave it there. Yes.
Another question that I had. When I was hearing everyone's really great answers, I was thinking that I think the first sci-fi thing that I was ever exposed to is that my mom and dad were obsessed with like the Star Trek whale movie. I don't know what it's called.
The Voyage.
Voyage Home.
Yeah. And so I feel like we watch
okay.
that like every year.
I actually don't know that one. I was about to ask, but okay.
It's great. There's time
Mhm.
travel, so.
And whales.
Yeah.
And whales.
Always a good combination.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like different levels of time travel too, I feel like.
I love time
Um,
travel stories, but they always break my brain. Like I love them. I cannot get enough of them, but they break my brain every time.
Yeah, I can relate to that one.
I think there's just so many different ways to tackle them as well. Like there's so many different like methods of time travel and like the mechanics of how it works and the rules of how it works that they're almost like magic systems.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I've also been reading a lot of time loop stories recently, and I feel like that's kind of like low key or low stakes time travel in the fact that like you don't have to necessarily describe, this entire ethical ramifications of like multiple time travelers. It's normally kind of just one.
Oh, I
So-
love time loops. Time loops are amazing.
Mhm. That's my like current obsession this year. It's been like that I've actively started just Googling like time loops, time loop stories. Another question that I had in the kind of sci-fi space realm is about other life forms in the world and the universe, and also kind of like the world building of how humans got to space. I think both of those are so linked, and I wanted to know what your all thoughts are about that. In I guess like a non-spoilery way. Um, Christy, do you want to start off?
Sorry, can you just clarify what the question was?
Oh yeah, sort of how do you approach the questions of other life forms in your world or universe, or even how humans, made it to space, which is not. I'll let other people like go in different directions with that question.
Yeah. It's tricky. It's really tricky. Sorry, I'm trying to come up with the words that I have to answer this. Can I go second?
Yeah. Do you want to
Okay,
start,
thank
Sam?
you.
Yeah, I mean, when I was writing Bluebird specifically, when I was like creating the background for this galaxy, the premise was sort of, thousands and thousands of years ago, humans kind of crashed into the galaxy, and then in true cynical sci-fi fashion, they started taking over and colonizing places. So by the time of the book, the perspective I came at it from is kind of that you have a lot of species that are humanoid, in part just because humanity showed up and started sleeping around because we're all a bunch of hoes. Um, so, you have a lot of species that have really unique traits or unique abilities, but they've all adapted into into like a form or a type of being that can survive well in humanoid society and all that.
Do you wanna jump in, Christy, or should
Yeah,
I?
yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
I just needed a second.
Okay.
I took the bullet for you.
You did, thank you. Yeah, so for my book, the aliens just kind of showed up. It was very jarring and sudden, and that is one of the themes that I really wanted to explore in this book is what does space look like? What does home feel like? And what does that mean for us when that's disrupted? And so, because I haven't sent anybody to space yet, that was sort of not saying that I won't in book 2, but that was sort of how I approached it for this book.
Taryn?
So for me, it's important that the other species, if there are any, tell the reader something about the characters or something about the other people. So like even a truly alien character tells us something about what we see as alien and what we see as human.
Yeah.
And so without spoilers, there's only 2 species in the book. There's humans, and then there's something that they call ministers. And the nature of the ministers is something that the main character doesn't know a lot about to start with. He just sees them as aliens that showed up out of nowhere one day and like ruined humanity's lives. And then as you go through the book, you learn more about who they are, why they're there, and what that means for them. So to me, it was important when I created them to figure out what I wanted to say about humans when I created an alien species. Yeah. And then for backstory, like I knew how humans got there, how the minister showed up, but the character doesn't. So a lot of the backstory that I made for the book didn't end up in the book, which it's good for background texture.
Extremely relatable.
Khan?
The same kind of principle that Taryn just talked about undergirds my approach to like alien stuff too, and that I wanted the alien cultures to reflect something about human society. And my approach, I really focused in in the world of the Circus Infinite on like the cultures of the different alien societies and their like spiritual practices and artistic traditions and things like that. I will not for a second pretend that like any of the species that I've imagined are like biologically feasible or could or I mean maybe like space is infinite, so who knows, right? But I didn't take like a real science biology based approach to creating the species, like for example the way Adrian Tchaikovsky did with the spiders and like Children of Time. It's, you know, like it's not grounded in real science at all. And as far as the human component and how they came to be part of this whole collection of, in the book, it is alluded to that a long time ago, humans destroyed their homeworld and ventured out into space, and they eventually settled on a couple of planets in this region of the galaxy, and over time, they were invited to join this alliance of worlds. So there is more, like I do have like a worked out history of like what happened and how they got there and how long it took them and blah, blah, blah. But none of that is in the book at all, is in this book at all. If I get a chance to write more in this world, I might one day do a prequel and tell that story. But for right now, it's just stuff that I know that's in my head.
Grant?
Yeah, same. I think I have so much like background and world building and history that just did not make it to the page because I only have this much space to tell the story. But it's told in two timelines. So in Under Fortunate Stars, you have two timelines that are 152 years apart. But even the first timeline, like the earlier time period, they're already spacefaring. So the part about how humans got into space and settled on different worlds isn't really a part of the story. But it is a first contact story. So in that earlier timeline, there was a first contact between humanity and an alien species called the Phelan. And that the way that war plays out is entirely very tied closely to them not being able to communicate with each other. So the whole reason that the conflict escalates and goes on as long as it does is because they cannot find a common language, and neither side of the conflict really understands how they could negotiate a way to peace or how they could even say anything to each other. And I think that this is something that Star Trek definitely does throughout all of the series, which is like examining human types of problems through the lens of alien contact or alien civilizations. But ultimately, because we're humans and our readers are humans, I think so, most of them, I think that ultimately all of these stories are about humanity and about turning that lens onto something about humanity or about ourselves, about our future, about how we relate to other people and other groups of people, and examining things, having an alien species either as observers of that or coming into contact with that is another way to push on those questions about what it means to be human, what we stand for, and how we connect with the world around us, and then especially the huge amount of things that we don't know. So first contact stories are definitely an interesting space to explore things. And the aliens in my book are probably less humanoid or human-like than most of the humanoid Star Trek species, but not quite as alien as like hard sci-fi aliens that are, as you say, more like concept, more biologically possible. I don't know how biologically possible they are, but for the purpose of this story, I think making them just a little bit closer to human in the sense that eventually it is possible to communicate with them was important for the story that I was telling here. But certainly I'd like to write more different types of first contact stories in future books.
I want to pair some books up. It was really hard because as I was making these questions, I kept thinking of like different ways to pair up everything. So I actually had to like edit out half of the amount of questions that I wrote and sent. Um, but these were just kind of the first pairs I initially thought of. So I went with my gut. But talking first about the Circus Infinite and Bluebird, both of these books really navigate questions of loyalty and sort of what we will do for people we love, what we will do in the name of being loyal, all things loyalty related. And so I wanted to know, how did you create your side characters as they sort of push and pull the main character, orbit around the main character, and then if you have a favorite side character. So between your two books, I don't know who I should start with. You want to start, Seal?
Oh, sure. Well, so I mean, I guess the main character, right, Rig, her sort of main thing is she feels as though she has to save her sister, right? And her sort of partner in crime, I guess, has a similar dilemma of like intense loyalty to the faction she belongs to, and it's all stupid. There shouldn't be that loyalty there. It's a terrible thing. Bad call. So it's kind of like the contrast between, well, I'm here to save my sister, who I don't get along with, and was actually kind of fine before I maybe screwed her life up, and we're totally close, not really. But that's totally different from this other person who's super loyal to somebody who doesn't care about her. Like, that's different. It's totally not at all the same thing, not even a little bit. So that was kind of where I started, creating like the push and pull between characters. My favorite side character, actually, I am unique in this. I have never met anybody else whose favorite side character is June. June is the protagonist's librarian girlfriend, and she's definitely a side character. Like, she's, we only meet her in person a couple times, and she's like someone Rig chats to, like, over the phone, essentially over the space phone. But I really like her, and I've never met anybody who's also like, oh yeah, she's my favorite. But I don't know. I demand justice for June. That's what I'll end on.
I really liked her. I also love the like library. I really love the library like setting and all of the sort of behind the scenes stuff that happened with like that aspect as well. I don't want to like so many things. I wish this was a spoiler chat, but like so many things obviously I can't say.
Oh yeah, like in that one chapter that's a spoiler, which references the plot point later on that, was definitely not a spoiler, and yeah.
Just bleep yourself.
Yeah. We could have like a little like foghorn that we can start spraying whenever someone says a spoiler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because also I feel like, and this must be magnified 100 times worse for the people who obviously wrote the books, but I also find that, when you talk to someone about the books, you like unconsciously kind of start slipping in things you didn't realize were spoilers. And yeah, but it must be magnified for you all.
Changing what you're saying halfway through an answer. Like, oh no, I'm gonna veer. I hope the rest of the sentence still makes sense because I can't say that.
But Khan, do you need me to repeat the question? I feel like it's been a while since I said it.
No, I think I got it.
Okay.
So the main character of the Circus Infinite, Jess, is at heart really a very loving person, but he's had a rough go of it for much of his life at the point that we meet him in the story. And so the community of the circus is really the first time where he's felt a sense of belonging. And so when it comes under threat, he's like, no, so I mean, and so that's kind of where it comes from for him. And I didn't really like when I was coming up with the side characters. To be honest, I had in the first, at the very beginning with the first draft, when I was coming up with the side characters, I was thinking more along the lines of circus archetypes, rather than like what specifically their purpose in the story would be, or what their like relationships would be. So there's like the burly crew chief, and the glamorous aerialist, and the quirky trio of acrobats, and the elegant juggling guy. And it was in the revision process that, and I always say revision is where the magic happens. And truly, with this, it was in the revision process that that the nature of their relationships kind of came into focus. And I'm not sure if I'm actually answering the question, but I'm talking about the development of the side characters and the relationships. So that's how it came for me. And I knew going in, though, having said all that, I knew going in that there would be the love interest, and there would also be a BFF figure. So I had some clues out, but I wasn't quite. I had a good idea who the love interest was going to be, but I wasn't at the beginning sure who that BFF character would turn out to be. So that came through in revisions. Yeah. As far as my favorite side character to write, I don't know if the antagonist counts as a side character. I mean, not really, I guess. All right. I mean, my favorite character in the book to write was the antagonist, the crime boss character. But as far as the side characters, I have two. Is it cheating if I name two? Okay. All right. So one is the star juggler in the circus, a character named Moxo, and then the other one is a character named Quash Onar, who's like he's a species that are essentially human-sized praying mantises. And the reason I liked writing those characters is because they gave me the opportunity to channel some aspects of like my personality that don't frequently get expressed. With Moxo, it's this kind of arch queeniness, and with Quash Onar, it's a kind of mystical sensibility, I guess, or awareness and way of being in the world. So so those were my favorite side characters to write, but it had more to do with me than the relationship with the protagonist.
Both, I want to switch to the Immortality Thief and Under Fortunate Stars. Both of them take so much of it takes place on a spaceship. So I wanted to know, how was the creation of like the spaceship world, quote unquote, sort of different or similar to one in the larger world? And like my baby side question to that is, do you have a map of the space station somewhere? Do you want to start, Taryn?
Sure. First thing when I'm creating a spaceship is the logistics, and gravity is the biggest thing for me. Like, does it have gravity? How does it have gravity? And in Immortality Thief, there's the spaceship is very old. It's 1,000 years old. So I wanted there to be a contrast between the spaceship that the protagonists come on that's modern versus this old spaceship. So the modern spaceship has like magical anti-gravity that provides gravity, but the old spaceship uses centripetal gravity. It rotates. So now that I knew what sort of shape it had to be, I knew that because they had no faster than light travel, it had to have certain ways to ensure survival. Like it has to have a way of producing food, like a big farmlands basically. And it had to have sources of water, places to live, sleep, eat, ways to get rid of dead bodies, and like labs for its primary purpose, which is human experimentation, unwilling human experimentation. And so after that, what mattered was atmosphere. It's a creepy place. It's a sad place and it's a creepy place. And so there's no lights. All the lights don't work because it's 1,000 years old. It's barely functional. And there's a lot of passages that you don't know where they go, sort of like being stuck in a university building after dark. And and there's like the remains of labs. There's some places where the creatures that live on board, and that is a spoiler, have interacted with what's left behind, and some places where they've avoided it. So it's almost more like a tomb than a really complicated tomb than a spaceship. And so that's really how I designed the spaceship, which they call the Nameless because it doesn't have a name. And I don't have blueprints of it in my head because I didn't need it. So I didn't go through that much trouble, but I know sort of where things are roughly just because the protagonist has to get around. So yeah, that's how I designed my spaceship. And next I'll go to Mars. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the Immortality Thief has like the literary equivalent of jump scares, just like a lot. Like,
Yeah.
Yes.
I would,
Chapter 1.
yeah,
It's
I would,
open it. And
yeah,
Just open the cupboard. Yeah. Snake.
that would be
Yeah.
meta.
Yeah.
Ren?
Yeah, it's interesting because in my book too, there's two ships, like one that's really old and not very functional, and one that's really new from like more than a century later. And it's a state-of-the-art science research vessel. So you do have the contrast between this sort of construction and functionality level of the two ships. But I think because the story ultimately is extremely character driven, so a lot of what you find out about the environments that the characters are in are very much told in the characters' feelings about it. So you know a lot about how characters feel about inhabiting a space and about the technology that they interact with. And then of course you have characters from a past time who are coming into contact with futuristic technology for the first time. So they are very excited by very regular things in the ship and stuff that they see, things which are just everyday objects to the people who live in that ship. So I think that's also a place where character development comes out, like what sorts of things are they interested in? What questions are they asking about what technology did during that time? And a lot of that depends on, the character's particular interests and what history they had back in their own time, what sorts of advances and things were interesting to them. And I think, again, because so much of the main action does take place on ships, when you visit other places that are not inside space vessels of some kind, you do that through character flashbacks. So essentially what you're seeing is characters' memories of being in other places. And I think that really factored into how I did the world building. Again, it's very feelings first because you're experiencing the characters' memories and feelings about being there. Oftentimes the flashbacks take you to a really important emotional or pivotal moment of their lives, which is not only helping you, the reader, to connect with something that's happening in the kind of main timeline, but it's also showing you something about where they were at that time in their lives and what places mean to people. So I think that really has pervaded all of the world building, both of the ships and the different planets and locations that you go to, is that it's not just a place, but it's either a home or an experience that they had that really shaped the character. So I hope that that helps to make the locations feel more immersive in a way, like someone's describing something to you from their feelings, not necessarily from what was really there, but what they recall of it.
And then before I go into my final question, I wanted to remind people that they can put in questions. There are already questions, but if you have more questions, please feel free to drop in the chat. I wanted to talk kind of related to actually what Ren was talking about with the time. I wanted to talk about the stars in their eyes. It definitely has like post-apocalyptic post vibe. I don't really know how to describe it, but like definitely because as you mentioned, you know, the aliens have already come to Earth when the book is taking place. So I wanted to know how you approached this world building challenge of like breaching this distance between, you know, like a world that we are living in and also the world of before and now this world of after.
Right. So a lot of my research that I did for the book helped construct that world because, like you said, there is quite a big time jump between when the aliens, I call them the others, when the others showed up and when the actual story takes place. Some of the research that I did for this had to do with Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon. Or Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation. There we go. I also reread a bunch of Judith Butler, which I said I would never do once I graduated from university, and went back and braved that. And the whole idea was that I wanted to get a better understanding of how people perform, like how they literally enact or fill certain roles in life or death situations, and how that might evolve as time goes on. And it's through Calais, that's our main character in The Stars in Their Eyes, it's through her experience that we start to put the pieces of what happened during those 4 years together. We don't get a lot of what happened between the actual collapse of society and when the story really begins, which I don't know if I said this. It's 4 years after the aliens arrived. I know it. The readers don't. It's not in the book, but there are flashbacks and emotional snippets of within I think it's the first 2 or 3 chapters, and like the other lovely humans here have said, the aliens really do reflect different aspects of humanity and the characters' inner struggles. And so by showing these flashbacks, we're getting extra glimpses into Calais' experience and her emotional state now. And that's really what I wanted to focus on for this book, was the now versus the then, which is another one of the themes that I play with, is Calais fights to reunite with the woman she loves. And it's like that question of time and how it relates to our experience in the larger world. And I hope that the reader gets to go along with that and feels that sort of it's almost like a disconnect for the first couple chapters, just because I'm trying to jar the reader into the same state that Calais is in now, 4 years after the aliens arrived.
So we're going to switch over to some audience questions. I'm also going to drop the giveaway link in the chat as well. One of the most interesting questions that I saw so far was a question about names. And they wanted to know, were the names you chose for people, places, ships, etc. meaningful, or did you choose them more randomly? I can call on people, or just does someone want to volunteer to go first?
I'll volunteer as tribute.
Okay.
The names in The Immortality Thief are a huge part of it. I think one of the first things the main character says is that he's talking about names and what names are and what they mean. And then he gives names to people whose real names he doesn't know yet that he uses to relate to them. And he's the one who names the ship, the Nameless, because it doesn't have a name. And so yeah, I like names. And I think they're a really interesting way to see how people view each other and what names they use with each other to show the relationships. For about half the book, or for at least half the book, you don't know the real names of the other 2 major characters in the book. And so for me, picking names was about the layers of intimacy that the reader would have with the characters too, because the reader doesn't know, and the reader is seeing it through the main character's perspective. One of my favorite moments in the book is when a side character uses another character's first name for the real name for the first time. But in terms of literally picking names, I use this website called Behind the Name a lot. Very good. So.
Does anyone else want to contribute, or should I just randomly call on people?
I don't know. I mean, I can go next. Yeah, all the names were hugely important. I ended up picking. So the name Bluebird is the name of the character's ship. I ended up, it's a different galaxy, so I wanted to have all the animals be, different animals. Like, somebody's like, oh yeah, that tiger over there, right? Like, it's not a tiger. They're not going to call it a tiger. But I made it so that all birds are the same in this universe as they are in this one, because birds ended up just being really important to the narrative. So yeah, and the protagonist Rig has blue skin because she's an alien, so her ship is named Bluebird. It was really galaxy brained of me, and definitely not kind of lazy, but went with it. And then with everyone else, some characters did end up having bird names as part of like a like it is part of that very particular niche of their societies. Like bird names are considered like auspicious, so a lot of people end up naming their kid bird names. And because I have never played Dragon Age in my life either, I did throw in a joke that's like, oh my god, there's so many people named Hawk. Like, I've met so many Hawks. Because, I've never played a BioWare game in my life. And yeah, it ended up being really important, especially since at the start of the book, the protagonist, she like flees the faction she's been part of, and she decides to change her name. So she escapes on like the type of spaceship she escapes on is a frigate ship. So she ended up changing her name to Rig. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have that too, where like Taryn was saying, that characters call each other different names depending on their relationship and also on the context, because you have some characters who are colleagues, but they are also have a history going back where they've been friends since university, so they address each other differently when they are talking to each other in private, like as friends, or when when they're out addressing the crew, because one of those characters is the captain, and he's very concerned about appearing favoriting, like that he's favoritist toward any of his crew. So he's very, very professional in some settings and not in others. But I think I also have that moment where somebody calls a person by their real name for the first time, and I think it's a moment that I really, really love. And I think there's a lot of weight in the way that characters address each other and which name that they choose. There is a funny story though, which is something that people ask constantly about how I picked the name of one of the ships. And the ship from the past that ends up kind of falling into this void and getting into contact with a ship from the future is called the Jonah. And so a lot of people have been like, is it because of Jonah and the whale, like Jonah being the void, because it falls into the void? Also, another one of my friends found a lexicon of like old nautical terms and found out like Jonah means a bad luck passenger on a ship. Like, is this why you picked the name? Because, an unlucky passenger on a ship is nicknamed Jonah. No, it's a placeholder name. When I was writing the story that became this book as a nano project, I was looking for a placeholder name, and there was a picture of Jonah Hill on like a celebrity. And I typed it in and it never left. That is the true story. So sometimes there is just no deeper reason, but I think honestly this turned out so funny that it couldn't have any better explanation. Yeah, that's it. It was a placeholder name that I never took out, but it just ended up like having multiple layers of meaning. So yeah, I'm prepared to be answering that in Q&As for the rest of the time.
I love the Jonah and the whale explanation though. Like it's very literary.
It feels very profound and very thought out, but yeah, definitely that.
Connor, Christy?
I'll go. So yeah, so for the character names, I know that this will sound very woo woo, and I hope it doesn't turn potential readers off. But with character names, the characters kind of just like come to me with like named. At least the characters that like the main characters, like the main character and like his close or their closest circle, that they kind of appear in my head like named and everything. But what happens afterwards is if I introduce another character that's of the same alien species or whatever, I want to make sure that the name like has the same kind of sound or uses the same letters or like has a lot of consonants if the first one did, like so that they're in alignment with each other. So at first it's kind of random, but then it's more considered after that, if that makes any sense. So that's how character names go. And then as far as in this book, there's a lot of names of like cultural objects or customs. And those took some time to figure out, but this is not, I don't know how common, I haven't actually talked to a lot of people who have done constructed languages, so I have no idea. I mean, maybe what I'm about to say is like, oh yes, of course, it's that trick. I'm like, I don't know. But it's kind of the same approach where I think of this, I come up with a word that describes a particular custom, but then I look at, okay, there's this za syllable that shows up. So what does that represent? And then like I make sure that other words that are referent around the same topic, like funerals, for example, that they all incorporate that sound with the same meaning. So that's how I do that.
It's super handy that your subconscious gives you the names at the same time as it gives you the character. I've spent hours.
Yeah. I've changed names of characters over and over again throughout drafts, like until I land on one that feels right. But I don't know if there's any like deeper meaning to most of them besides that it ends up feeling like it suits the character after a point, or they've just had it so long that you're like, yep, that's their name. Like,
gotta love
Yes, that's
fantasynamegenerator.com.
And then I always Google it to make sure I'm not accidentally naming them after like a
Yeah.
of something or like a Nazi war criminal or something. Like my worst fear. So I spend hours on names.
Yeah, mine are interestingly similar to Khan's in that most of my main characters arrive to me with their name. And quite often I'll start with a name before I even know what the story is. The character just sort of shows up in my head, and it's I call it the magic of the universe. I don't know where it comes from. It just shows up. And I start developing a character before I even have a story a lot of the time. I just finished, not related to this book, but I just finished a sapphic YA fantasy, and I had the two main characters in that completely developed and with personality traits and turns of phrase. I know their attachment styles, and but it was before I had anything to do with the book. So that's usually how the main characters come to me. That's how I name them. They name themselves. And then for the side characters or supporting characters, I spend a lot of time on various name generators, or looking for through a thesaurus, even to look for different meanings or similar words. Usually I try to name those characters after a specific personality trait, or like for almost all of my characters that I've ever written, if you go to any of the side characters, if you were to Google their names, you can find spoilers just by doing that. So don't do that. But it's part of how I infuse extra personality for myself when I'm writing, because it evokes that personality trait or that something about them that I really want to reinforce. So that's how I pick mine.
Okay, and then I think we have time for one more question. This was interesting. I like this one. It was, were there any times you were surprised by something in your writing? A plot point that just came to you, a research rabbit hole, characters who ended up somewhere you didn't expect them to. Yeah. So, do you want me to call on someone? I can. Do you want to start, Christy? Sorry.
Sure. I was shocked several times writing The Stars in Their Eyes. Every time, there's several fairly large twists in my book. I like a good twist, and so I put a lot of them in there. But anytime one of them like clicked and you connected a whole bunch of threads together, and you're like, oh my God, this works. I would surprise myself. I can't say what they are because you have to read the book. But pretty much anytime something like that happened, it was pretty fantastic. And I also surprised myself, this changed, but I also surprised myself at how unlikable the main character was at first. Nobody, I sent it to, I think, 6 or 7 different beta readers on the first draft, and nobody liked her. Nobody could even connect with her. And I had written her at a time where I was going through some pretty personal traumatic stuff. And she really did reflect my inner world. And I wondered what that said about me at the time. But that was a big surprise too. She's much more likable in the final draft.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
Ren, you started.
I just think that especially if you're writing anything that's kind of a mystery type of plot or things that have multiple interlocking subplots, I think the thing that surprised me most is how many times I would have already put all the pieces in place before I figured out what I was doing with a subplot, and then I was like, oh, I already set that up. It's like your subconscious mind is already working on putting the pieces in before you even really fully get there. So it did surprise me how many times at the time when I came up with something, I was like, oh, there's already like a pretty good place where that could be foreshadowed, or oh wow, this really seems like it's setting that up, even though I didn't know that yet when I wrote that first bit. So I think that at least for me, I think there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes while I'm writing that I don't necessarily even see how I'm going to use something, but I leave a lot of little hooks that I can then pull on later when I need to tie things together.
Yeah, that laying the groundwork without realizing that you're already doing that was it happened really big time in this book I'm currently working on. But in the Circus Infinite, there were two. The example of the dynamic that Ren was just talking about subconsciously laying the groundwork, was the character of Jasmine, who's a pop star in this universe. And I really don't know why. I have this obsession with pop stars, it's a thing. But I wanted this pop star just kind of flitting in and out. But I didn't really know why. There is a plot development in which spoiler, but there is a plot thing that happens that is related to the pop star. But that I didn't know going, like when she first appeared and I was first inserting her and like having her songs playing in the background and stuff, like what it was all about. But the other big surprise that in the Circus Infinite actually is the crime boss character and that whole plot line. Like when I set out to write the book, I was totally going for Becky Chambers style, slice of life, cozy circus thing, and that's kind of what I was like aiming for. And then and at one writing session, this the manager of the circus asked Jess to come, the main character, to go with her to this meeting, and I was like, well, who are they even meeting with, and what are they meeting about? Blah, blah, blah. And then the crime boss guy appeared, and I was like, oh, and then like all the rest of the story happened from there. But like I had no idea. I'm probably not unrelated. This is the first time I really tried pantsing a book. So I mean, that probably played into it as well.
Yeah, I plot really aggressively. I have very long outlines, so most of what I'm writing doesn't come as a surprise when I'm actually writing it, because it's in the outline, and if it's not in the outline, I have to stop and go back and re-outline it. But there was one line that I didn't outline that came to me when I was writing the scene. I had like a different placeholder line there that I immediately dumped because the new line was better. And I can say the line, I just can't tell you who's saying it. But one character says, "You didn't love me until after I died," and it was very good for the scene. It really summarized a lot of fears that the main character has, and like Ren said, it must have been something that my subconscious was working on, independently of me actually writing it. But usually when I write, that doesn't happen very often because I plan it very, very specifically. So it was a nice moment.
Oh, me, right. Yeah. I, when I started writing Bluebird, I was very much pantsing it, and that didn't work out well. It had to go through so many rounds of revisions that now I can't even remember if there were, bits that kind of just like came to me, because so much of it had to be really heavily edited and really worked on, and so much of it had to just become way more deliberate than it was originally. But you mentioned lines, and there is actually a line in the book that like I did not think of in advance. The line is, had he not been so determined to look down upon her, she never would have had the right angle to put the bullet in his head. And I wrote that, and then I was like, oh, yeah, that's like the point.
That's quotable.
I was like, oh, yeah, that sums up the theme, doesn't it? But I think apart from that, the last book I read that's currently on submission, if any editors are watching this, there's a character, he's very like soldier type, not super stoic, but he's not like, out having a good time, very kind of militaristic, focused on revenge. And I was thinking about him one day, and I was like, he can play the harp. Do I know why? No, but he can play the harp. I've decided on that one.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think little stuff like that, though, is even if that didn't make it to the page, knowing that a character has these dimensions outside of what's on the page, even if they're a super minor character, I think can just come across in like a little thing they say, or like what jokes they make, or all of that does still echo into the book, even if it never gets said.
Yeah.
I was able actually to write a line where he mentions he can play the harp, because I was like, oh, no, I like that. I got to include that.
Could be plot significant later, too.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you all so much. Also, thanks for the questions. There were, of course, questions we didn't get to answer, but thank you for giving them and for chatting with us all and for validating my new unofficial "The One with the Whales" title. I think that that'll be something
we surprisingly did not talk about Star Trek. I didn't even say Star Trek when I was saying my influences. Like, yes, Star Trek all the way down.
Yeah. That was certainly something I was gonna maybe bring up if we had no questions too, like make everyone pick their like favorite season, basically.
Excellent.
Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek. I will stand by that forever.
Hard agree.
Yeah.
TNG.
Yes.
TNG.
These are all very valid answers, but I know in my heart I'm correct.
But yes, thank you so much, everyone, for chatting. Thank you to the authors for hanging out and chatting as well. I'm leaving everyone's like book links will be down below. I will also put the giveaway link as well in the description after this panel. But yeah, thank you everyone for chatting with us and for reading and writing and all the good stuff in the sci-fi space, which has like reinvigorated my love for everything, basically.
Thanks for gathering us all together, Lily.
Yeah.
Thanks
Yeah,
for having
thank you.
us.
This was
I
really
hope
fun.
that everyone
Thank
has
you.
a great rest of your waking, your daylight hours.
Well, I got about another 20 minutes, so you know.
Daylight hour singular.
Yeah.
in like the approaching end of, or the approaching like dark times.
I think we've been in the dark times since 2016.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.